record button, and I'm gonna get some slides on the screen with y'all. And we'll
have slides.
Well, you don't, but I have intro slides. All right. Thank you everyone for being here. We are expecting dozens of people. And so we are going to have people check in through the chat, if you can do that real quick. And sorry, I have one person saying they can't get in. Okay. And Michaela, if you're listening, could you real quick, if you have the right Zoom link, could you email that to Siobhan just in case? Make sure she's seeing that. We're going to go ahead and get started. Again, please do put names in the chats as you get the chance. We're going to start today. Thank you for being here for the COVIDeo series. This is session number 27 of our series that started at the beginning of April. And today is market studies and COVID-19. This is a topic so many of you asked for. We're excited to be able to do it, and that Darnell and Debbie are donating their time. And the way we're going to structure it today is I'm actually not going to be facilitating very much. That's what Darnell's here to do. I decided it'd be great to have someone who's not only a professional facilitator, but who's been in your shoes. She was the project manager for several years for Dorchester Food Co-op in Boston. Did great work there, helped them grow their ownership and get their project forward. And I thought it'd be great to have someone who's been in the trenches, can approach these questions from a startup perspective. So she's going to be kind of interviewing Debbie today and running the session for you. So that said, please do check in through the chat, like I said, and I'm going to, it kind of doesn't let me see the chat if I'm on full screen, which is bizarre. All right, and I see Debbie's here, yay. All right, so a couple quick notes. Video, if you can join us by video, please do. This one especially is gonna be very conversational. We're not gonna be staring at slides for an hour. We're gonna be talking to each other. So if you can be on video, it really contributes to the conversation. We understand if you can't. Mute, please, if you're not speaking. And because we're expecting so many in the room, please don't unmute and speak until invited to do so. So if you have questions and comments, you throw them in the chat. If you want to be called on, if you know how to use the hand raising function, you can use that, but please just be able to say also in the chat that you have a question. If you write the question, the facilitator might just share it and it might actually verbalize it for you. If you want to actually talk to the speakers yourself, say I have a question and say that in the chat, and when it's time and it's appropriate, they'll call on you. But please don't just unmute without being called on. We are expecting dozens of folks today. It gets kind of messy. This call is being recorded. Keep that in mind when you're speaking. This will be publicly shared. And check-ins, which was done through our chat, which again, I'm gonna try and see. There we go. Okay, so who all we got in the room today? So far, we've got Oshkosh Food Co-op in the room. We've got the Free Range in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Paso Food Co-op from Paso Robles, California. Another Free Ranger. We had Cedar Falls Food Co-op in Cedar Falls, Iowa. We've got Purple Carrot Co-op here with us. Food Shed Co-op from McHenry, Illinois. We've got Purple Carrot. There we go. Little Falls, Minnesota. We got Chicago Market from Chicago, Illinois here with us. Village Co-op Market of Williamsville in New York. And we've got Grand Rapids Food Co-op from Grand Rapids, Michigan. We've got, let's see what else we have. Suncoast Market is in the room from Imperial Beach, California. We also have Westchester Cooperative from Westchester, Pennsylvania with us today. Good to see you guys. Whitewater Grocery Co-op from Wisconsin. And let's see, did I miss anyone else? Common Share from Amherst, Massachusetts. Good to see you guys. Kim is with us from Market 166 Co-op out just on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia. And we've got Prairie Food Co-op here from the suburbs of Chicago out in Lombard, Illinois. Assabet Village Co-op Market is here from Maynard, Massachusetts. See, I'm losing my tongue here. And Riverside Food Co-op from California. So full house. Thank you all for being here with us today. Today's call is focused. Remember what our topic is when we get into conversation. We are utilizing the time of experts who are donating their time that we don't usually get access to like this. So let's keep it on topic and do use the chat to share questions. Our presenters today, again, as I said, someone asked, Darnell Adams with Firebrand Cooperative. Firebrand is not a startup co-op. It is actually, it's a consulting co-op. and Darnell can speak to that for a moment if people have questions. So Darnell worked with startup cooperatives, but now her organization is cooperatively owned, but it's professionals who do project management, leadership coaching, graphic design, and so forth. Debbie Suassuna, Debbie Suassuna is with us from G2G Research, and she does market studies, and many of you have worked with her. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to turn it over to Darnell.
Hi, everyone. So good to see you. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Jacqueline. And Debbie, good to see you as well, and good to work with you again.
Same here.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. I will be asking some questions of Debbie, which she'll answer. This might spark other questions from you as she shares her knowledge with you. Feel free to, as Jacqueline said, write questions in the chat as they come up. Depending on how active the chat room is, I might ask for some grace if I miss a question or two, but I'll try to integrate the questions as best I can. And then there'll also be time for questions and answers after some of my post questions. And so if I don't address it during the first half of the discussion, there certainly should be time in the latter half. So we'll get started. And Debbie, I wanted to start with a question that has come up in some conversations that I've had with startups. There's a lot of concern about that there might be a recession or even a depression coming based on, in some ways, just the kind of ebb and flow of the economic patterns, but also certainly because of COVID and lockdowns. Will things like that, like knowing that there's a recession coming, kind of affect how you approach your market studies?
You know, not so much the market study process. I mean, we've been through the Great Recession, and during that time, I was incredibly busy with work because as it turns out, in a recession, people are eating out at restaurants less, and they're shopping for groceries and eating at home more. So my co-op clients the existing co-ops were performing very well. People were eating healthier. Maybe they lost their healthcare coverage and they just couldn't afford to get sick. So they were very mindful about adopting healthier eating habits as well. So while there probably are going to be some strategies that co-ops are going to have to employ, it doesn't really affect the market study process. And again, the recession seems to benefit grocery stores at basically the detriment of sit-down restaurants.
So that is kind of an interesting thing. I think when I was thinking about this before, my assumption was that a recession would kind of negatively impact sales and therefore market studies, and you're giving a different perspective. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Sure. You know, the co-ops performed well during the recession. I can't tell you specifically what their in-store strategies were like in terms of pricing. I'm sure it varied from market to market, but they were performing well. I was doing, you know, more market studies during the Great Recession than after the Great Recession. I would have to say, though, you know, that was a while ago when there wasn't as much competition for co-ops. And maybe now, you know, it doesn't benefit the co-op as much just because now people have more options in terms of purchasing healthier food from grocery stores. So, you know, they may not benefit as much in the next recession as they did in the previous recession.
Along the lines of this time in history and how communities are being affected, this actual question came from Siobhan at Adaptability. But should startup co-ops worry that everyone is now used to grocery deliveries and CSAs, and it might be harder for them to kind of even come into a new store once you open?
Well, I think that, you know, there's long-term effects and short-term effects of the pandemic, and it's hard at this point to figure out which is which. But I do think a long-term effect is that people are going to use grocery delivery more. So there was a projection that by 2025, 18% of the U.S. households would use grocery delivery, and in April it was 49%. So we've gone past that. Now, I don't know that it's going to stick, it's going to stay that high, but certainly many of those people are going to continue using grocery delivery. But the other aspect you have to understand is even before the pandemic, people that shopped for groceries online still visited brick and mortar stores as often as people who didn't shop online. Now, they're probably spending less in the store, but as most people are finding, there's some things that are easy to shop for online, and there's some things, you know, like my mom is doing all her grocery shopping online, and when I'm, you know, not traveling like I am now, I'll do it for her. But she does not like the fruit that they bring to her home. So so there's some things that after the pandemic, you know, people are going to go back to the brick and mortars and shop for, but there's still kind of those staple things, and those, especially those dry packaged foods, that they're going to continue to do the delivery. So I don't know if that answered Siobhan's question, but co-ops should offer that. And Michelle Schrei is doing a webinar. Michelle Schrei from NCG is doing a webinar with FCI. I think it's June 10th, to talk about curbside and online shopping for co-ops.
Kind of the chat is starting to get active here. And so I'm going to ask this question from Food Shed. Mentioned, I can imagine that what Debbie is saying is true regarding food sales with up and coming co-ops. What about up and coming co-ops who still need to find money to procure a site and such?
You know, I'm not sure I understand the question, but the other thing about the recession happened last time is there were more real estate opportunities for co-ops. So finding a site was a little easier. The lending institutions were a little stricter, so that added a problem. But in terms of real estate, there was more real estate opportunities, which will happen again with the next recession.
Thank you. We're gonna actually bounce back to, you mentioned deliveries, and this is from Lori in Philly, South Philly, hello. Are you accounting for delivery service in market studies now?
No, the reason for that is I update my database every year. And right now it's based on co-op performance levels from 2019. So it's pre-pandemic, and it's most co-ops did not offer curbside or online delivery pre-pandemic. And a lot of that was because it was hard for them to find a financially feasible way to do that. And the pandemic has kind of forced co-ops to figure that out. And I hope that I'm going to be watching on June, I think it's June 10th, when NCG presents a webinar about kind of what they're seeing with that, because they really need to offer the service. So hopefully, you know, I have a client, Ozark Natural Foods in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and they sent me a link to their online ordering site. It's through Mercado. I think that's how you pronounce it. So some co-ops are doing it, so they're finding a way. And I'm sure because the pandemic has been thrust upon us, it's forcing us to now kind of figure it out more quickly. So it's not factored into the market studies now. In a year, it will be.
Thank you. And another question that I'm going to do from the chat, and then I'm going to ask you a question that I had kind of pre-prepared as well. And the chat is going, so the question's already scrolled all the way up. Let's see. This is from Kim Estes. Does a co-op generally tend to be more agile and have the ability to adapt to changing customer patterns and changes in the supply chain? And I'm not sure if this is something that you feel like you can speak to, But it's certainly an interesting one.
Not so much, I don't think so from the supply chain standpoint, but I'm not the expert on that. I do think they're more adaptive into figuring out what the consumers need and to change it more quickly than a large chain. And one thing that co-ops do better than other stores, large chains, is procure local goods, local foods. And I have this, you know, I don't know if this is going to be a longer term or an accelerated trend. I do see a push towards more locally produced foods, consumption of that. It's a way to create wealth in your own community, but then it's also those fewer touch points, you know, fewer people are involved in bringing that food into your store.
Lots of questions here. So I'm going to pick another one actually from the chat as well. And this is from Lacey Whitewater. Hi, Lacey. If we already have a market study, is there a time when we should consider getting a new one to account for loss of jobs and income in the community?
You know, market studies that I'm doing today are for stores that aren't going to open for another 3 years. So we're not really sure what life's going to be like 3 years from now. It might be, you know, much like it was pre-pandemic. But I would say that at this point, it's just projecting what's going to happen in the future. And maybe by 2021, we'll have a clearer idea. And that's maybe a time when we update the market study.
Okay, thank you. This goes along the lines of kind of things that are happening now in certain communities, right? So do you believe market studies will be, or even your approach, will be affected in communities and cities that have had a high degree of COVID infections and therefore maybe even more restrictions than, say, other places that have been less affected? Is that something that you would also take into consideration?
Yes, but it's more, you know, definitely in areas like that. Like, so for example, I'm in New York right now, and it's required to wear a facial mask in the grocery stores. Every other, you know, I've been doing market studies throughout the pandemic. I think I'm on my 6th one now during the pandemic. And all the other markets, you weren't required to wear your face mask. I mean, about 2/3 of people did, but then there was a third that really didn't. So maybe in places like New York and New Jersey, they're gonna be stricter in, you know, maybe they'll be doing more social distancing for a longer period of time. There's going to be hand sanitation stations throughout the store. They're still going to be cleaning the carts. I think there will be more longer lasting effect in some of those markets. But I was reading, I don't know if this is along the same topic, but I was reading, I think that the Hartman Group put out something basically saying that they're noticing that people that live in urban cities that tended not to cook, particularly younger people, are now cooking and they're enjoying it, and they're saying that they're going to continue doing it. So I have many a client that says that, you know, they haven't been, you know, they've been, you know, how the stores are now, grocery stores are now called grocerants because they're a restaurant and a grocery store. I think you're going to find now in some of these urban markets in these cities that people are going to be cooking more, going to grocery stores more still, but buying the ingredients to cook rather than going out in restaurants.
This question is kind of related, so I'm going to try to fit it in and see if you have some thoughts on this. And this is not particularly COVID related, but Mary Ellen Hafner, do you find that big grocery store chains selling organic food is not as flavorful because it's bigger mass-produced crops? And I guess I would kind of think about that and weave it into if there's a certain situation now as it is, as people are sourcing more locally and maybe finding the quality very different, and appreciating that. Is there some kind of like market positioning that co-ops might find themselves in that's positive?
Yeah, I think they've always had that, and it's becoming more important to consumers now. So they've always had that, you know, the how do I want to say it? The emphasis on local and the sense of community and the things that seem to be even more important today than they were before the pandemic. So, and you don't find that sense of community and that commitment to local farms in the Hannafords or the Price Choppers, which you find that have always found that in co-ops, and I think consumers are going to look for that even more.
This has to do with kind of just the word on the street for some co-ops at present, reporting that there had been lots of changes in terms of market size, average market size, frequency of shopping. Kind of mentioned some of these things before, but wondering if you could speak a little bit to that. And then also, again, you know, for the startup food co-ops, is there something that they can kind of, that it would affect their market study or the way that they should think about, you know, their performance?
Yeah, you know, I think that there's sorry, there's something going out in the hallway and it's distracting me. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'd like to. I hope
Sorry, I'm in a hotel.
Oh, how did I put that? I was asking about current co-ops at present, kind of reporting differences and changes in average market basket size, frequency of shopping, et cetera. Wondering what you've heard, and then also, do any of that data, will that play into current market studies now?
Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, there was definitely fewer shopping trips and higher basket sizes. And that's changed now as we're starting to reopen. There is an older population that's going to want to go back to the world of one-stop shopping, right? We haven't had one-stop shopping in a while because, you know, people like to go to Trader Joe's for something, and then Kroger for something, and then their natural food store for something, or the co-op for something. And now everybody's kind of gone back to one place and, you know, just buying as much as they can, stocking up, and so fewer trips, higher basket sizes. I don't know that that's going to stick, except it's going to be, at least until there's a vaccine. If I'm an older person, if I'm over 65, I'm definitely want to, you know, I'm going to do the delivery, and I'm going to go into as few stores as I possibly can. But I think that's more of a short-term impact. And I think that, you know, once, you know, God willing, there's, you know, some kind of vaccine next year, I think that then people are going to start going back to the way, you know, they were before, where there's something special at this store that they want, something special at that store that they want, so they make multiple trips.
Debbie, can you kind of speak a bit more and clarify in like what your kind of demarcation about the longer term effects, shorter term effects, what things that we're seeing obviously in the news every day is the thing that's capturing our attention, but that may not necessarily be playing into your market study. So if you can kind of just walk us through a little bit of your kind of thinking about that, the assumptions that are made and things like that.
Yeah, so I mean, I completely believe that the long-term effect is accelerating the amount of grocery delivery and curbside pickup. So that's why I keep bringing up that webinar that Michelle Schreisman, because I need to get educated on that as well, because I obviously want to factor in that sales component into my market studies. There's other things that I don't know if people are going to go back to self-serve food bars. So right now, when I'm doing a market study, I may, I may recommend self-serve food bars in the market study report, but I'm also putting in that report, okay, but you need to be flexible, because you want to make sure that you don't make that self-serve food bar a permanent fixture in your store. You want to be something that you want it to be something that you can move off the sales floor if you need to and put something else in its place. They also make food bars that go from a self-serve to a full serve by shifting the plexiglass from one side to another. So it can be self-serve, and then if people aren't liking that and aren't using it, then you shift the plexiglass over, and then you put an employee on the other side, and they make the salads or whatever foods that are on, in that bar for the customer. So again, I don't know if that the lack of use of food bars is going to be short-term or long-term. So I'm pointing out flexibility, and I'm also pointing out you need extra space for curbside pickup. Again, I think that's a longer trend. So in my market studies, I'm recommending non-retail space, a staging area for that, because right now, if you'll notice, the co-ops that just started doing it, they don't have a separate space for it. So they have limited their store hours. So, you can only shop, for a shorter amount of time in the store. And part of that reason is for cleaning the store. And the other part is they're using the retail space to stage the curbside pickups. So they might do the curbside pickups in the morning, and then they open up the store for the customers in the afternoon.
So I'm going to actually jump back to a question from a kind of a follow-up thought from Lori from South Philly, because in this stage they have a market study. They're kind of well on their way to opening. So there's some things that they hadn't necessarily accounted for clearly. And so Lori had just kind of mentioned, so it wouldn't be worth it for us to update our market study now that since they won't be including, they hadn't included kind of delivery or curbside delivery.
Right. So if that's not something that's going to be done, even if it is going to be something that a co-op wants to do, I can't really estimate the sales lift until I get more information from the existing co-ops that are employing that right now. So I need to understand what kind of sales they're getting from it, and whether it's profitable sales or not.
I believe in answering the last question that I had, you've also answered this, but just want to make sure for Grant Kessler, in Chicago Market. Hi, Grant. Are any of your during COVID studies updates? And if so, which direction do you see them going? Is there really no impact from COVID in an update right now?
There are no updates. They're all first-time market studies, and there's no real. There's really. I can't think of anything that I would update for COVID-19. There might be other reasons to update it, like changes in competition or things like that. But for COVID-19, again, I'm kind of stuck in this place where I don't know what the short-term effects versus the long-term effects are right now. And what I'm emphasizing to my clients is flexibility. That goes back to the self-serve versus full-serve food bars, and also having that extra space for a staging area. But it's really tough right now for anyone to predict, what's going to happen in the fall, what's going to happen next year. Are people going to change their shopping habits for good?
Okay. And I had a poll question and I actually forgot to unleash that, but this might be a good time to at least do one of them, just so we have a sense of who's in the room. But so a quick poll, so we can get a sense of where your questions are and kind of where you're going.
Well, there's another trend that I think is accelerated, which is food as medicine. I think that started before the pandemic, and it slowly, steadily increased. And I think that it's immunity foods right now, immunity supporting foods right now that are very popular. But I think that's going to stick.
Okay, and Debbie, you can see the poll results?
Yep.
So it's very interesting. And I think for South Philly, Lori, you have really specific questions because you're obviously in that 4%. So I think that might be some conversations you might want to have kind of offline as well, but we'll try to address them as we can. Let's see, we have a bunch of activity here again. Okay. Sorry, scrolling quickly. All right. Actually, what I'm going to do is also, I had a second question, and I think this is, we've been speaking so much about long-term effects, short-term effects. These are probably, as organizers and folks who are about to open a store, you've been thinking a lot about this. But I'm curious from your perspective, your thoughts on this. So let's see, hopefully I'm going to cut and paste in the chat and hopefully this works. And I'll submit. So in the chat box, if you have any thoughts, kind of things that have been going on in your community, in your head, thinking about how this pandemic might have some kind of much longer long-term effects that you're trying to take into consideration, just pop them in the chat. Kind of curious to see where your thinking is at this point. You know, employee safety, that's another one, kind of thinking in terms of short-term, long-term. You know, I would imagine in thinking about labor, would certainly affect market studies, but or at least performance. So, and some of the assumptions around that. Debbie, do you have any feelings or thoughts about kind of what groups can do in thinking about as they're organizing and thinking about what labor costs might look like, or employee safety period, and then also costs?
Yeah, it's not, you know, it's not really part of the market study, but, you know, there's, I think, greater respect among people at large for people that work in grocery stores. And I know that co-ops have struggled for a long time to get, you know, management, you know, department managers, store managers, that sort of thing. And, you know, I'm hopeful that that will change because there's this newfound respect now because grocery stores are so essential and people recognize that now. And I would, you know, I would hope that, you know, when I first started during the beginning of the pandemic flying, I was always wearing a mask, but the flight attendants weren't. And I asked a flight attendant why she wasn't wearing a mask. Why didn't they require it for the employees? And she said, I have a mask because I'm at risk, but they won't let me wear it. And I was like, okay. Now that's not right. So I, you know, just in my work with co-ops through the pandemic, all the employees have always been wearing, when I go into an existing co-op, they're wearing gloves, they're wearing a mask, you know, they're cleaning the carts. Everything feels much safer in the co-op than it does elsewhere. So you know, I feel like co-ops are doing a good job with safety. I can't speak to the expense of it, but I do, you know, I do feel that the co-ops are doing it at a better pace than other industries. So like I said, I can't really speak to the expense, but.
Right, right. And what you're saying basically is that, you know, your market study is kind of measuring some data and some factors. That is not necessarily one of them, but it's something that might could possibly affect assumptions in a pro forma?
Yes, it could. That would be Don Moffitt's area.
Yep. Okay. Lots going on. This is an interesting one, and I think others might also be in this particular situation. Lacey from in Whitewater, our community is built around a university. If the university sees long-term changes in attendance or reorganizes or closes, what will that do to our market? This would be a concern in any community that has a large employer or things like that. So I think it's an interesting question, and also kind of a, I'm sure, scary one. Do you have any thoughts about that as well?
I think, you know, when we talked about longer term trends and accelerated trends, the accelerated trends are, you know, more people working from home, and also now more students doing online education instead of in-person education. What I probably said when I met with Lacey and her group, and what I always try to say when I'm ever in a college town, that it's not the students at a university that sustain the co-op. The co-op is sustained by the year-round population, which would, you know, in a lot of college towns happens to be the alumni and the staff of that college. And they're the ones that load up the shopping carts and spend, you know, most of their shopping dollars at the co-op, where unless they're a graduate student living off campus, most students that live on campus are, you know, coming in for a burrito or coming in for, you know, $7 purchase or something like that. So they're important. They're more like the gravy, right? So it's nice to have that, but the core customer is not really the student. So sales will be less, but that doesn't mean that the store is not going to be supportable, because you still hopefully have that year-round population base.
Got it. Thank you. Oh,
You
Jacqueline,
mind
did
if I have
you?
a quick comment? I was going to say,
Please.
we have seen this happen. Carbondale, Illinois is a kind of similar to Whitewater. The college is the town, been downsized and dropping student involvement. And while the co-op has been affected, because the workers are, right? Because you're right, because Debbie's right. It's the employees who are spending the money there, but they have seen an effect. But they have been able to actually maintain sales and only shrink a little bit, and even start to regrow them by changing some of the way they approach. So I'd say, you know, yes, I mean, if the employers are hit, the employees are hit, but there are ways to mitigate some of that. And that's something, if anyone wants to talk about, I can put you in touch with those who've kind of been through it. I will not be quiet.
No, that was perfect. Actually, I appreciate that. I
Thank
don't
you.
ever be quiet. I like you talking. So a question from Jason Herlands. Should we, so this was in relation to the kind of response to long-term effects. Should we even bother carrying dry goods in a retail store? So kind of center aisle goods in general, bulk items, like, is there value there?
Yes, it's the, over the years, that center store has been shrinking because that's the most competitive part of the co-op, right? That dry packaged foods are the ones that you find at a lot of conventional supermarkets, and at a lower price at times. Really, it's the fresh foods and prepared foods that are the anchor department. And when people come to the store, they come for those departments, but then they might get their oatmeal and some other things while they're there. But yes, but you know, shrinking the center store, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think you want some amount of dry foods, but you're right, it's not something that should be emphasized really.
I am going to, not exactly sure, I've been kind of scrolling the questions and then trying to kind of feed them in as the conversation's been going on, but I want to take a little time here to kind of open it to questions either that I wasn't able to address before and are somewhere in the stream all the way up as I scroll, or something else that has kind of come up hasn't necessarily been addressed yet, or clarifications to any of the points that Debbie has brought up. So kind of opening it up to larger questions. Kim Estes, please.
Hey, this has been great. Thank you so much, and great facilitating too. I know that must be hard to balance. My question is really along the lines of how much the co-op trends are the same as what the big market grocery retailers are seeing. So can we expect that if, like, so I've listened to some of the grocery retail presentations, and they're seeing some of the same things I would think we would see, but I'm just wondering, Debbie, like, do you think that's a good resource as we kind of try to take advantage of some of those insights and look ahead? And I'll be quiet and listen.
Well, the reasons that co-ops are forming is because there's something missing at those other stores, and part of it is the kind of the locally owned store kind of community centerpiece kind of thing, and also providing a healthier option to people. And the conventional supermarkets are just trying to, they're not focused, they're just trying to be so many different things to so many different people. And while they're going to have some healthy foods, it's generally their prepared foods aren't that healthy. For example, my mom used to get some kind of salad at Kroger. I can't remember what it was. I think it was called like summer slaw or something like that. But they printed the ingredients on the side of the container, plastic container, and there were so many ingredients on there, I had to get a magnifying glass to read them all. And like, I think the number 2 ingredient was high fructose corn syrup. So co-ops are always going to have their niche, really. So it's just a matter of, what fits your particular market. And as we kind of talked about before, it's the conventional stores don't have the flexibility to help those communities.
Debbie, I think this is from Lois, and I believe this was kind of along the lines of the center aisles. The question was about co-op bulk foods. Is that also how do you see that trending?
So they've been kind of on a downtrend just because millennials don't cook as much as previous generations, which it sounds like it's certainly changing in cities, because before this webinar was reading something that basically said that urbanites are learning new cooking skills and saying they're going to, cook more, even post-pandemic. So generally those people also buy bulk foods. So there could be a lift in that. What you see today, because I go in, I don't know how many hundreds of grocery stores I've been in the past couple of months, but if anybody has a scoop bulk bin, they've been closed down. But the gravity bins are still being used. So I'm sure that attention will be paid to the type of equipment that grocery stores use in terms of dispensing the bulk foods. So there's no common scoop that everybody's touching. But there might be a brighter future for bulk foods if people are going to be cooking more.
This is a question from Scott and Kim at Food Shed Co-op. The pandemic has caused us to think more about and play with the idea of a preservation kitchen for several reasons. Does Debbie have any thoughts at all about this idea? And we might want to start with what is a preservation kitchen?
Yes, what is it?
So Scott and Kim, I don't see, but you can go ahead and unmute. And
want me to unmute and talk about that?
Please do.
So the idea is that we would be able to save more food that would typically go to waste. So the fresh produce, for instance, would come in, and then we would move it, say, to the deli on the second or third or fourth day. And then if it wasn't used there, we'd eventually move it to the preservation kitchen where it'd get pickled or fermented or freeze-dried or maybe several other possibilities. And then we would sell that in our store. And the reason we're playing more with the idea is that there just seems to be, in our estimation, more concern about food security and maybe people putting food away in case bad things happen and they need some food in their basement to save for a rainy day. So that's the 30,000 foot view of our thought about that.
Well, and the preservation kitchen would actually be a part of the kitchen. We spoke with Nicole about that, and she said you wouldn't necessarily have to have two separate kitchens, that some of this equipment could just be a section in the kitchen. So.
But do you have any thoughts about that as it applies to the market study, and if anybody's done that sort of thing from your knowledge?
Yeah, to my knowledge, nobody has, but I'm going to check into that. I do know that a lot of grocery stores like the idea of having like a juice bar or a smoothie bar, because that limits the amount of waste from the produce department, because they can, you know, repurpose it into the juices or the smoothies. But yeah, if it's, you know, like Nicole said, if it's just something that you had as part of your existing kitchen, it seems like a lot of co-ops might want to do this. But no, I haven't heard anybody that has a preservation kitchen, but I'm going to look into it.
Our role model is that it's not a co-op exactly, but it should be. It's a privately owned natural food store in Beloit, Wisconsin called Bushel and Peck. And basically our role model would be them, if you want to check them out.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Question from Lori in South Philly. Box programs such as CSAs and even non-local items seem to be on the rise. We are launching a SPFC Basics box, a curated box of non-perishable pantry items plus toilet paper, TP. Do you see curated boxes of basics items living beyond the pandemic?
Yeah, and in certain communities, I think it makes a lot of sense. I even think that, you know, one of the accelerated trends to kind of jump off that into meal kits, I think there's going to be a greater interest in purchasing meal kits as well. So yeah, any type of you know, combination food for different customer segments, I think is a great idea. And I have met with some startups that were contacted by farmers who never did direct to consumer sales because, you know, they had restaurants to sell to and then they didn't. And so they contacted the co-op, but they weren't an existing co-op, they had no store, to ask them how they could go about doing that. So I'm sure there's also a lot of farmers out there that would want to participate in that, just to kind of open up a new customer segment for them.
Thank you. Any other questions or anything that I missed? Or anything that you'd like us to follow up or get into more detail with? Okay.
I got a quick question then. Can you talk about something you mentioned to me, Debbie, is I think people are wondering if they decide to do a market study right now, is the experience going to be the same? Are you coming there? Like, should they expect the experience of actually getting a market study to change in any way?
It hasn't changed thus far. It's the same process. I'm still coming to the market, evaluating their site, visiting all the other food store competitors. Actually, the only thing that's changed is that, so I think this is my sixth market study during the pandemic. This will be the 4th time that we haven't met in person with the co-op group, that we're just going to do a Zoom meeting while I'm in town. So that was really the only change. But as far as the process, it's pretty much the same. The report, now I'm stressing the flexibility in terms of I'm not really sure what the long-term effect is on self-serve food bars. So let's do something that we can, if those aren't going to work, we can make sure it's not a permanent fixture in the store, or we can make it full serve, or just having that kind of flexibility. But until we kind of understand what the more long-term effects are going to be, there's really not much change.
Debbie, if you had, there was a lot of things that came up in this conversation, and it was certainly interesting, went in different directions. But if there were kind of 3 big takeaways, if we forgot everything else off of this call, but 3 big takeaways that you could share with us before we all leave each other, what would it be? And there's, I think, also another question, but yeah, what would that be?
Well, I think we found during this pandemic that people, the survivors are going to be those that can adapt, and the ones that have, the delivery service or the curbside service are the benefactors here. The ones that don't, that haven't changed, are really suffering. So I think that if there's one thing that you need to definitely incorporate into your co-op, it's going to be some type of either curbside pickup or delivery. We can do it in a financially feasible way, which I'm sure we're going to figure it out because we have to. But that and embrace technology, because obviously, I live with my 78-year-old mother, and I do not want to kill her. I don't want to bring back a virus that's going to kill her, so I'm careful. So I am so happy when I don't have to touch anything in the checkout process. I had somebody today hand me a receipt on a tray. I'm like, okay, that's never happened. But if you can do like Apple Pay or something like that in your store, something that I can just use my phone and I don't have to touch anything in the store, I would be thrilled if I could do that. So just, embrace technology, figure out the curbside pickup, how you can incorporate that, or the online delivery service, incorporate that into your store, because I think you're going to have it in order to survive. I think that's the future. I mean, 49% in April of people used some online grocery delivery service, and a lot of those people are going to continue to use it, and you're going to suffer if you don't offer it.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, before I kind of hand this back to Jacqueline, I just want to say thank you for your enthusiasm and participation. This was really fun to moderate and see all your faces. So just want to, thank you for making my piece of this really fun and enjoyable.
All right, well, I'm just going to take this moment to thank Darnell and Debbie for donating their time to do this with us today. I know we really all wanted this one, so I think it was a great conversation. And I would just want to make sure you know about the sessions coming up, so don't leave us quite yet, because a lot of things that I talked about today, like Debbie said, we're going to be talking about them. So want to share real quick some of the stuff that's coming up with you. Monday is board confidential. That is for board chairs, and that is capped at 20 people. We're at about 17 people registered right now. It's only for board chairs, and we're going to be talking this time about running online meetings and making that effective, and what's been working and what's not. So Wednesday we will have the decision to pause. This is a request to talk about people who come and share about if you've chosen to pause in certain areas of your development, why not, what that means, how we relaunch effectively if we do pause some of our work. So we'll be talking about that. But I think more interesting On Friday, that's all me. We'll have co-op leadership at Patrice Lockard-Anthony. She's going to be talking about the disparate effects of COVID-19 on the Black community and what that means about the future of co-op organizing and how we should be thinking about it. It's going to be a great session. The future of lending on Tuesday, July 9th. Christina Jennings, the executive director of Share Capital Co-op, one of the co-ops, financial co-ops that has lent to a vast majority of the startups that are open, is going to be her talking about some of the impacts on lending. Some of them we see coming, but she actually sees some hidden silver linings coming possibly in lending to startup food co-ops. So I think it'll be a really worthwhile session. We have that session coming up with Michelle Schrei and National Cooperative Grocers on what they're seeing. They're doing some really quick, intense study of curbside and online ordering, things that co-ops have not been able to crack and make financially sustainable until now. But now a vast number of them have been pushed into it all at once, and they're collecting the data and see what's happening with it. She's going to be sharing about that actually at the CCMA conference. That's the food co-op conference for all food co-ops, which is online this year and $25 instead of like $900. So check it out. She'll be presenting to them, to established co-ops there. She's going to join us 2 days later and talk about it from a startup perspective. You might want to catch both. So we'll send that link out to y'all. And then we just found out we're going to have Nicole Klimek from Seven Roots joining us. She's a store designer for cooperatives, if you don't already work with her, and they're already changing how they lay out stores, bulk departments, delis. They're already making decisions about changing how they design stores in the moment that they think are going to be permanent changes. And so that's a conversation you're probably going to want to hear as well. So the series will be continuing through the end of June because y'all keep sending us great topics, and so more the weekly newsletter will be coming out later today with all the new offerings that are coming up, and we hope to see you in future sessions. Thank you again to Darnell and Debbie. We really appreciate it. They're really busy folks, and this has been a terrific session. Thanks, everyone.